The radio stations of Vice City are truly an audio marvel. If you're a fan of 80s music, everything from pop and classic rock to heavy metal, new wave to old school hip-hop, R&B and funk to salsa, it's got options. If you want to hear some fictional talk radio in the GTA world, you got options there too. VCPR and K-Chat serve as Vice City's two talk radio stations, one featuring debates on various topics and the other being interviews with celebrities and comments from callers, and all of it being some pretty good satire on life and politics in the 1980s. We're all familiar with the 9 radio stations in Grand Theft Auto Vice City, but according to the files, there was originally meant to be a 10th radio station that players could listen to, 810 VCN. If this logo looks familiar to you, it's probably because you've seen it on the VCN building in downtown Vice City. Despite not being a radio station that you can listen to in the game, they still have a building, just like V-Rock. Like I described in my last video, every radio station in the game was likely going to have its own dedicated building at some point because the files of the game also include radar icons for every radio station. The purpose of this is unknown, but maybe on top of running a drug empire as well as a car dealership, cab company, nightclub, strip club, film studio, and ice cream manufacturer, Tommy would have also been a media mogul. That's my theory at least. I bet some media companies wish they could own every station in an entire market. Funny enough, this actually proves that VCN was going to be a radio station and not just a random sign texture for a building and a helicopter. They wouldn't have made the radar icon for one station that we can't listen to and included with the others that we can listen to. There's also another logo for it found with the other radio station logos. So, 810 VCN likely was going to be a radio station in the game at some point, but what would have been on it? Well, going by the fact that the letters VCN obviously stand for Vice City News and how they own a helicopter like a lot of news stations do, and the fact that it seems to be on an AM signal like a lot of news and talk radio stations in the US are, I'm guessing that VCN would have either been an all-news format or the ever-prevalent news talk format that we see in cities across America. It could have been a talk station with news in between the shows like most talk stations in America have. Or it could have been a non-stop news broadcast, similar to the real-life 1010 Winds in New York, WBBM in Chicago, or KNX in Los Angeles. 24-hour local news for Vice City. In a way, I guess it would have been like having an entire radio station dedicated to playing the entire WCTR news briefs from San Andreas, or all of the Weasel News radio headlines we heard in GTA 4 and 5. While it would have been cool to hear the various news headlines they could have come up with for Vice City, I can already see some of the reasons why they potentially might have cut this station. The first thing I thought of was that it could have been technical issues, but I don't think this is really the case. Just because San Andreas was the first GTA to feature news that updated on WCTR, they probably could have still done something similar for VCN if they actually wanted it to reflect what happens as you progress through the story. And let's face it, in a series like Grand Theft Auto where players tend to cause a lot of havoc throughout the game's story, hearing about our escapades on the news afterwards is only realistic. Maybe cutting it was a creative decision rather than a technical one. Vice City already has 2 talk radio stations, maybe they figured that a third would have just been too much. GTA 4 had 3 talk radio stations, but perhaps at the time of Vice City's development, they could have thought that 3 non-music stations would have just been pointless. By the way, GTA 4 was also a game that they had 4 years to work on. Vice City was made in 1 year, so maybe coming up with the script, recording the dialogue, and editing it all together was just not a viable option considering all the other stuff they were likely busy with. No matter if VCN was going to be all news like I described before, or news talk where it would have featured a third talk show for the game with news briefs in place of commercials. By the way, to me, the VCN building kinda has a slight resemblance to a building in real life located at 500 East Broward Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale. The building is home to numerous businesses, but 2 media outlets are located there as well, WSFL-TV and Fox Sports South Florida. Whether or not they based the VCN building on this place is unknown, but even though the VCN building is way shorter and the real-life building's in Fort Lauderdale, which is quite a distance from downtown Miami, I think there's at least a bit of a resemblance between them. But it could just be a coincidence that they have a similar architectural style and house 2 media outlets as well. There's also always a chance that maybe they did have time to work on VCN, but they could have just felt that the content wasn't up to the same quality of the other radio stations. VCPR and K-Chat were both chock full of satire on the 80s and various social issues and parodies of prominent figures back then, and they also provided some story background because a few characters that appear at various points in the game's story have guest spots on the talk radio stations. But maybe they felt that VCN's content was just not funny enough, or just completely pointless and unrelated to the story, so they just felt that cutting it was the best option at the time. I know there's a lot of maybes in this, but that's just because this was another decision that Rockstar made to remove something from the game without leaving much else behind. We can only go by what we know about with the final game and finding any other clues from there. And like with the Gator keys and the radio station radar icons, we can always still speculate on this sort of thing. If you have any other ideas for what 810 VCN was supposed to be or why it got cut, feel free to share them. Because unless someone from Rockstar gives us a definitive answer, we'll probably never know the reason why this radio station was cut from the game. As always, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.